On the day I was discharged from the hospital, my children and wife suddenly said they were too busy to pick me up. The only person who came was my grandson, who drove 300 kilometers just to bring me home. As I stepped into his truck, I whispered, "Don't take me home. Drive straight to my lawyer's office." I stayed silent while everyone thought I was helpless. But my next decision would change everything they believed about me forever after. I'm truly thankful to each of you for being here with Dad's Revenge Stories. Where in the world are you watching today? Drop your town, city, or country down below. Quick note: this narrative incorporates fictional elements designed for drama and educational reflection. Any similarity to actual names or places is purely coincidental, yet the message conveyed carries powerful meaning. The first thing I noticed when they wheeled me through those hospital doors was the sky. It was the kind of pale gray that comes just before sunrise in Tennessee when the darkness hasn't fully decided to leave yet. I had spent 11 days inside Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and in all that time I had forgotten what outside air smelled like. It smelled like wet pavement and cut grass and something faintly metallic, the way early mornings always do in September. The second thing I noticed was who was standing in the parking lot. Not who I expected. Not Jason, who had gripped my hand in the emergency room 11 days ago and said, "Dad, I'll be there the minute they discharge you. I promise." Not Diane, who had kissed my cheek every evening during visiting hours and called me her hero in front of the nurses. Not Carol, who had straightened my blanket and told me she'd have the house ready and warm when I came home. The parking lot held exactly one person. My grandson Noah stood beside his battered 1999 Ford Ranger, the one with the cracked passenger mirror and the rust eating through the wheel wells. He was wearing the same gray hoodie he'd had since his sophomore year of high school, and his eyes were red in the way that only happens after a person has been driving through the night without sleeping. He was 19 years old, and he had come 300 miles to stand in a hospital parking lot at 6 in the morning. And when he saw me come through those doors, he jogged across the pavement and took the bag out of the nurse's hands before she could even offer. "So I got it," he said. Not to me, to her. Then he looked at me and his jaw worked for a second like he was trying to find the right words. And when he couldn't, he just said, "Hey, Grandpa." "Hey, son," I said. The nurse handed me a discharge folder and reminded me to schedule a follow-up with Dr. Alan Miller within 2 weeks. I nodded and shook her hand and thanked her by name because her name was Linda and she had brought me an extra blanket on the 4th night, without being asked. And that was the kind of thing a man remembers. Then Noah walked me to the passenger side of the Ranger and opened the door, and I climbed in slowly because my chest still pulled when I moved too fast. And that was just something I was going to have to live with for a while. Noah got in on the driver's side. He reached for the GPS on the dashboard, one of those old clip-on units that takes 30 seconds to load, and he pressed the power button. I put my hand over his and held it there. He looked at me. "Don't turn that on," I said. "Don't take me home, Noah. Drive straight to Margaret Oakes's office on 5th Avenue downtown." "Do you know where that is?" He stared at me for a long moment. Outside, a hospital van pulled slowly past us, its hazard lights blinking orange against the gray morning. Noah's hand was still under mine, and I could feel him thinking, working through it, trying to decide if I was confused or medicated or something else entirely. "Grandpa," he said carefully, "are you okay?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the dark circles under his eyes and the coffee stain on the front of his hoodie, and the way his hands were gripping the steering wheel, even though the engine wasn't running yet. This boy had driven through the night to stand in a parking lot for me. He hadn't texted ahead asking if I needed anything. He hadn't sent a gift basket or a card signed with his name. He had simply gotten in a truck with a cracked mirror and driven 300 miles because that was what the moment required. "I haven't been okay for 14 months, I told him. "But I will be. Just drive." Noah held my gaze for another second. Then he nodded, once started the engine, and pulled out of the parking space without another word. The Ranger rattled a little at low speeds always had, and the heater took a full minute to kick in, and the radio had a loose wire that made the left speaker cut out on turns. None of that mattered. We moved through the quiet Nashville streets with the sky turning slowly from gray to the faintest shade of pink, and I watched the hospital disappear in the side mirror, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 11 days, like I was finally facing the right direction. We had been driving for about 10 minutes when Noah spoke. "Dad and Aunt Diane sent a message to the group chat this morning," he said. He wasn't looking at me. He kept his eyes on the road, both hands on the wheel. "Dad said he had a shareholders meeting he couldn't move. Aunt Diane said she had a church commitment she'd scheduled months ago." He paused. "Carol said she had a dentist appointment." He said it flatly. No anger in it, or at least none he was letting show. Just the facts laid out in order the way you'd read items off a grocery list. "I know," I said. "I just thought you should know that I know what they said." He changed lanes smoothly, signaling first, even though the streets were nearly empty. "And I thought you should know I don't believe any of it." My chest tightened, and it had nothing to do with the surgery. "There's something I need to tell you," I said before we get to Margaret's office. Something I should have told someone a long time ago. I turned and looked out the passenger window. The city was waking up slowly around us, lights coming on in apartment windows, a delivery truck idling outside a bakery on a side street. It's going to take a little while to explain, and some of it is going to be hard to hear. Noah didn't flinch. He didn't look over at me with worry or start asking questions before I was ready. He just reached forward and turned off the GPS that was still trying to load, and he said, "I've got time, Grandpa. Tell me whatever you need to tell me." So I took a breath that stretched the stitches along my sternum just enough to remind me they were there, and I started at the beginning. "It wasn't the surgery that nearly killed me," I said. "It was what I saw on a phone screen on the 9th day." Noah kept both hands on the wheel and didn't say a word. That was one of the things I had always appreciated about that boy. He knew when to be quiet without making the quiet feel heavy. I watched the Nashville streets give way to the interstate, and I organized my thoughts the way I had always organized a repair job. Start with what you can see, work backward to what broke. "Jason came to visit on the 9th day," I said. "Alone. Carol had been there in the mornings, Diane in the evenings, but Jason usually came in the afternoon around 2 when the floor was quieter. He'd sit in the chair by the window, talk about nothing much. The weather, a football game, some problem with a supplier he was vague about. Then his phone would ring, and he'd step into the hallway to answer it." I paused. Outside a highway sign read Nashville City Center 2 miles. Beatrice. That afternoon he forgot his phone on the chair when he stepped out. He'd set it face down, but when it buzzed, the screen lit up and flipped over on the cushion. I pressed 2 fingers against my sternum, not from pain, just from the memory of it. I could see the screen from my bed. The notification preview showed the name of the group chat before it went dark again. Noah's jaw tightened. "What was it called?" "Family Business," I said. That was the name of the group. The 4 of them, Jason, Diane, Melissa, Carol. A group chat I had never been invited to and never knew existed. I told him what I had read in those 3 seconds before the screen went dark. Not everything there wasn't time for everything before Jason came back into the room. But enough. A message from Melissa that mentioned a document being ready. A reply from Diane that said simply, "Make sure he signs before he gets his strength back." And below that, a message from Jason that I read twice to make sure I had understood it correctly. "Once it's done, we move him to Sunset Valley. Carol already called ahead. Noah made a sound low in his throat. His knuckles were pale against the steering wheel. I closed my eyes before Jason came back in, I said. He picked up his phone, checked the screen, put it in his pocket. Then he sat back down and told me the Tennessee Titans had a decent shot at the playoffs this year. I let out a slow breath. I talked about football with my son for 20 minutes, while my chest was held together with surgical staples, and I had just read a message about which care facility he planned to ship me to. Grandpa. Noah's voice cracked on the second syllable. Let me finish, I said not unkindly. There's more. He nodded, his throat moving as he swallowed. The day before that, I said, was my birthday, September 4th, 72 years old. I turned and looked out the passenger window at the city moving past. I had been in that hospital for 4 days. I want you to think about what that means, 8 days, and not one of them had mentioned it. Not Carol, who had been bringing me coffee every morning. Not Diane, who kissed my cheek every evening and called me her hero. Not Jason. I stopped. I checked the family calendar on my tablet, the one we all share. My birthday had been on that calendar for 3 years running. Someone had deleted it. The Ranger hit a shallow pothole and shuddered. Noah corrected the wheel automatically. When I lay there that night thinking maybe I was wrong, I said, maybe the calendar had glitched. Maybe they were planning something for when I got home. I told myself every reasonable thing I could think of, because that is what you do when the alternative is too painful to sit with. My voice stayed even. I had practiced keeping it even. Then, at 11:47, my phone screen lit up. A video call, from you. Noah exhaled sharply, like something had punctured him. You were in the back room of that convenience store, I said. I could see the shelving units behind you, motor oil, paper towels, that kind of thing. You had taken your break early to make the call. You were still wearing your work vest. I felt the tightening in my throat that I had been keeping at bay for most of the morning. You had a cupcake in front of the camera, chocolate with a single candle stuck in the frosting, and you sang happy birthday in that quiet way you have, like you didn't want to bother anyone in the store, but you weren't going to skip the song either. Noah said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the road, and they were bright with something he was refusing to let spill over. I cried, I told him plainly. Lying there in that hospital bed at midnight with monitors beeping and a drainage tube still in my side, I cried. Like I hadn't cried since Eleanor died. Not because I was sad about the birthday. I cried because I realized something in that moment that I hadn't let myself fully understand before. I looked at my grandson's profile, the straight line of his jaw, the way he held himself in that old truck, like it was the most natural place in the world for him to be. The people who are supposed to love you will sometimes disappoint you so completely that you stop being surprised by it. But the ones who actually do, they show up in back rooms of convenience stores at midnight with a chocolate cupcake and a candle, and they sing to you even when nobody's watching. Noah pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. His shoulders rose and fell with the breath he was working hard to control. You didn't have to drive 300 miles today, I said. Yes, I did, he said, and his voice was rough and certain and young in a way that made my chest ache with something that had nothing to do with the surgery. I nodded and turned back to the windshield. There's more to tell you, I said. But first I need you to know something. What I'm about to explain, it didn't start in that hospital room. It started a long time before that. And the birthday, the chat group, the phone on the chair, those were just the moments I finally stopped pretending I hadn't already known. Noah wiped his eye quickly with his sleeve the way young men do when they don't want to be caught doing it. But that's not the worst part, I said quietly. The worst part was the photograph. 3 days before they discharged me, you sent me a photograph. Do you remember that Noah glanced over from the driver's seat? You asked me to check on the house, make sure the heat was running. That's right. You texted me 3 pictures: the front porch, the kitchen, the living room. I kept my voice level. In the living room, there was a wall behind the couch. That wall had a framed photograph on it. A large one, maybe 30 inches wide. 4 generations of Callaways taken at the family reunion last July. Your great-uncle Harold brought his fiddle, and your cousin Lucy cried because a bee landed on her arm. I stopped for a moment. Do you remember that photograph? Yeah, Noah said slowly. I remember it. Look at the picture you sent me again. Right now, if you want. It's still on your phone. Noah's eyes stayed on the road. His voice dropped. It's not the same picture, is it? It wasn't a question. No, I said. It is not. What hung on that wall in your photograph was a different frame entirely. Same size, same position, same dark wood border. But the image inside had been replaced. A newer photo taken at Diane's house last Thanksgiving, cropped tight around Jason and Diane and Carol and Melissa and the grandchildren. A perfectly nice photograph of a family gathered around a table. I was not in it. Not cut off at the edge. Not partially visible. Simply absent the way a person is absent from a room they were never invited into. Melissa had swapped the frames sometime during my first week in the hospital, while I was lying in a bed 3 floors above a surgical suite, learning how to breathe without pain again. She had taken down 40 years of family history and replaced it with a version of this family that did not include me. And then she had called it a cleaning project. Noah's right hand came off the wheel and pressed flat against his thigh hard, like he was steadying himself. Ray told me, I said. I called him after I saw your photo. Ray Hutchins has worked in my shop for 27 years, and he checks on the house when I'm away, because that's the kind of man he is. He'd been over the day before you went. He saw the old picture still on the wall. I let that land. It happened between his visit and yours. Sometime in a 12-hour window, someone came into my home and took my family off the wall. Grandpa. Noah's voice had gone rough and low, the way voices go when the words being said are too large for normal conversation. I didn't realize when I sent you that picture. I didn't look closely enough. I'm sorry, I should have. Stop, I said firmly. You have nothing to apologize for. Not one thing. Do you hear me? He pressed his lips together and nodded. But that wasn't all you sent me, I said. You sent me the bedroom too. The 3rd picture. You said you wanted me to see that the room was ready. The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when 2 people already know where a story is going, and neither one wants to arrive there first. There was nothing in it, Noah said. His voice was barely above a murmur. Nothing, I confirmed. My clothes were gone. The photographs I kept on the dresser, Eleanor on our wedding day in 1987. The 2 of us at the Grand Canyon, the summer after the picture of me and my father, standing outside the original shop the year I opened it, all of it was gone. The medals from the trade association I'd been a member of for 30 years. The leather journal I'd been writing in since Eleanor passed. I pressed my fingers against the door handle, not gripping it, just resting them there. I called Ray again. He made some calls of his own. By that evening, he had the answer. Noah said nothing, but his breathing had changed, shorter, quieter. Melissa had posted it all on Facebook Marketplace, I said. The clothes, the frames, the medals, the furniture, everything she could carry. She'd started the day I was admitted and kept going for nearly a week. Ray found the listings, some of them were still up. Eleanor's wedding photograph sold for $8. My throat tightened around the number. $8. To a stranger in Brentwood who probably needed a frame. Noah made a sound that wasn't quite a word. His jaw was clenched tight enough that I could see the muscle working beneath his cheek. So the room they were preparing for me, I said, was not the master bedroom. Carol had moved her things into it the second day I was in the hospital. The room they intended to put me in was the storage room behind the garage. Small window, no climate control space, enough for a single cot and a nightstand. I watched a delivery truck merge onto the interstate ahead of us. They put a box fan in the corner. Ray saw it when he went to look. A box fan so they could say they had made an effort. Noah exhaled through his teeth a sharp, controlled sound. They had already decided I was not coming back to my own home, I said. They were not preparing a place for me to recover. They were preparing a place to keep me until the paperwork was finished. I turned and looked at my grandson. His profile was rigid, his eyes fixed straight ahead, and there were two bright spots of color high on his cheekbones that had nothing to do with the morning cold. They sold Eleanor's photograph for $8, Noah, and they put a box fan in a storage room and called it Care. Noah hit the turn signal for the downtown exit. His hand was trembling slightly on the lever. They were preparing for me not to matter, I said quietly. And they had been preparing for a long time. I let the words settle. Then I said the thing that led to everything else. What I haven't told you yet is why I wasn't surprised. I have spent 51 years working with my hands. I know what a well-made thing looks like. I know what corners were cut and what joints were rushed and what parts were assembled by someone who understood what they were building versus someone who was simply trying to finish. After a while, that kind of knowing stops being something you think about. It becomes something you feel. And about 14 months ago, I started feeling something wrong in my own house. Not all at once. The way a hairline crack appears in a block of steel, you don't see it the first time. You see it the second time and think maybe it was always there. By the third time, you know. It started with questions. I told Noah. Small ones. Jason asking about the shop's insurance policy. Diane wanting to know if I had updated my will after Eleanor passed. Carol mentioning very casually one Sunday morning that her nephew was a financial advisor and had helped several older clients simplify their accounts. I looked at the back of my left hand, at the scars and grease-stained knuckles that never fully came clean, no matter how hard I scrubbed. Each one of those conversations taken alone sounds reasonable. A son asking about insurance, a daughter thinking about the future, a wife looking out for her husband. I paused. But they didn't happen alone. They happened one after the other every few weeks for nearly a year. Noah was quiet, listening with his whole body in the way young people do when they finally understand that an adult is telling them something true. Then came the paper, I said. I explained it to him carefully because I wanted him to understand exactly what it was. A durable power of attorney is a legal document. When you sign one, you give another person, the agent, the authority to make decisions on your behalf. Financial decisions, medical decisions. The word durable means the document stays in effect even if you become incapacitated. Even if you cannot speak for yourself. Even if you are lying in a hospital bed with surgical staples in your chest and a drainage tube in your side and a head full of anesthesia that hasn't fully worn off. A durable power of attorney gives another person authority over the specific areas you authorize, such as financial matters or medical decisions. The exact powers depend entirely on the document's language and the limits you set when signing it, with your name on the document and theirs on the decisions. Melissa drafted it, I said. She and Diane together from what Margaret later pieced together. The document was formatted, printed, and notarized as a template 2 weeks before my heart attack. They were waiting for the right moment to put it in front of me. Noah's voice came out tight and careful. "How did you find out?" "Margaret," I said. "Margaret Oakes has been my attorney for 31 years. When Carol started asking questions about my accounts last summer, something felt wrong enough that I called Margaret without telling anyone. She requested a records check through channels I won't bore you with, and she found the document. I felt the old anger move through me, not hot, just steady and cold, the way it had settled in after the first shock wore off. It had been drafted by an online legal service, paid for with a credit card in Melissa's name. 14 days before I collapsed in the driveway at 5 in the morning with my left arm going numb. The interstate narrowed toward the downtown exit, and Noah slowed the Ranger without being asked. He handled that truck the way he handled most things, quietly, without making a production of it. "The storage room," he said. "That was connected." "Though everything was connected," I said. The storage room was not a kindness. It was a holding area. No phone signal back there, I checked, when I still owned the house, free and clear. No neighbors with a sightline to that window. The only person who would hear me if I called out would be whoever was already inside the house. I shifted in the seat, feeling the pull of scar tissue along my sternum. They needed me home not to care for me. They needed me home so they could put the document in front of me in a quiet room with no witnesses and no one to ask questions. Noah made a sound that was half breath and half something harder. "What stopped them?" he asked. "My heart," I said. And despite everything, something in my voice almost sounded like it found that funny. My heart stopped them. They wanted me vulnerable, dependent, and easier to control. My illness simply happened before they were ready. But the attack happened before they were ready. Before the timing was right. And suddenly I was in a hospital with nurses and doctors and visiting hours and medical staff who logged every person who came through that door. I looked at him. Hospitals are harder to control than storage rooms. Noah exhaled slowly, and the sound carried every mile of the 300 he had driven through the night to be sitting in that seat. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Go ahead." He took a moment. Outside, the downtown buildings were rising around us, brick and glass catching the early light. "Were you scared? When you figured it out, all of it, were you scared?" I thought about that honestly, the way the question deserved. "Shut it, not of them," I said finally. I was scared I had waited too long, that I had spent so many years hoping people would become who I needed them to be, that I had forgotten to protect what I had actually built. I watched a traffic light ahead cycle from red to green. That's the kind of scared that keeps a man up at night. Not fear of what someone else will do. Fear of what you allowed by looking the other way. Noah pulled onto Fifth Avenue and the truck slowed. "We're almost there," he said. "Well, I know." I straightened in the seat. "But there's one more thing you need to understand before we walk through that door." Noah looked at me. "They didn't do this to me," I said. "I let them think they could, and those are two very different things." 3 months before my heart attack, Jason showed up at the shop on a Tuesday morning without calling ahead. That alone should have told me something. Jason had not set foot inside Callaway Precision Works in 4 years. He had opinions about the shop, the way people have opinions about places they have never actually worked. Confident, uninformed, and delivered with the kind of ease that comes from never having had grease under your fingernails. He was wearing new boots. I noticed because the soles were clean and the laces were still bright white. And nobody wears new boots to a machine shop unless they have never been in one before, or they want to make an impression. Jason wanted to make an impression. "Dad," he said, standing in the doorway with the morning light behind him, "I've been thinking. I want to learn the business, for real this time, from the ground up." I looked at him for a long moment. He was 44 years old, and he had my jaw and his mother's eyes, and he was standing in the doorway of the shop I had built from nothing with an expression on his face that I recognized immediately because I had spent years hoping to see it. It looked like sincerity. It looked like a son finally ready to become something. I said, "Come on in. Coffee's on the workbench." Ray Hutchins was in the back, running a threading job on the lathe. He looked up when Jason walked in, nodded once, and looked back at his work. Ray has a gift for reading people that he never advertises. Later that evening, after Jason had gone home, Ray leaned against the tool cabinet and said to me quietly, "Boss, that boy's writing things down, but he's not looking at the parts." I told Ray I appreciated the observation. I did not tell him I had already noticed. For 3 months, Jason came to the shop twice a week. Tuesday mornings and Thursday afternoons, regular as a billing cycle. I taught him everything I would have taught him at 22 if he had ever asked. How to read a technical drawing. How to estimate a job without undercutting your own labor. How to talk to a client who is angry about a timeline and walk him back to reasonable without losing the contract. Jason took notes in a small spiral notebook he kept in his jacket pocket, and he asked questions that sounded exactly right, and twice he stayed late enough that I bought him dinner from the barbecue place on 7th Street that he used to love when he was a teenager. Those dinners were the closest I had felt to my son in 20 years. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I need you to understand what was at stake for me in those 3 months. It was not the shop. The shop I had already protected. What was at stake was something I had been grieving quietly for a very long time. The idea of my son standing beside me in the place I had built, learning the thing I had spent my life doing, carrying it forward. Every father who has ever built anything with his hands knows what I am talking about. You don't build it for yourself. You build it because you hope someday someone who carries your name will want to continue it. Jason made me believe for 3 months that someone did. The notebook changed everything. Ray found it on a Thursday afternoon, tucked behind a coolant reservoir on the secondary workbench. Jason had left early that day, said he had a call with an accountant. Ray brought the notebook to me without opening it, set it on my desk, and said, "Thought you'd want to see this before I put it in, lost and found." Then he walked back out to the floor, and I sat alone in my office and opened it. The first 6 pages looked exactly like what they were supposed to be. Technical notes, measurements, a sketch of the mill setup I had shown him in February. I almost closed it there. Almost. Page 7 was a list. Typed and printed, then folded and tucked inside the back cover. 14 line items. Each piece of major equipment in the shop, with a model number, an estimated age, and a current market resale value pulled from an industrial auction website. At the bottom, a total. $1.2 million in equipment alone. Below that, a single line in Jason's handwriting, Finch contract $340K annually, key asset, must retain or renegotiate post-transfer. Harold Finch had been my client for 19 years. He ran 4 manufacturing facilities across Middle Tennessee, and he sent me maintenance work year-round without bidding it out, because we had shaken hands in this shop in 2006, and neither of us had ever seen a reason to revisit the arrangement. 2 months earlier, I had introduced Jason to Harold at the shop, put my hand on my son's shoulder and said, "This is Jason. He'll be taking over someday." Harold had shaken Jason's hand warmly. I had felt proud in a way I had not felt in years. Harold Finch's name was on that list, with a $sign next to it. I sat in my office with that notebook open on my desk for a long time. The lathe was running in his back. I could hear Ray working the steady mechanical rhythm of it, And outside the window, the afternoon was turning gold, the way Tennessee afternoons do in early summer. I closed the notebook carefully. I placed it exactly where Ray had found it, behind the coolant reservoir, at the same angle, with the same dust disturbed around it in the same pattern. Then I picked up my phone and called Margaret Oakes. "It's time," I told her. She knew what I meant. We had talked about this possibility 6 months earlier, when I first started feeling that hairline crack. She said, "I'll start the paperwork tonight." I said, "Make sure Noah's name is spelled correctly on everything." There was a pause on the line. Then Margaret said, "Thomas, are you sure about the boy?" And I said the truest thing I had said in months. "He's the only one I am sure about. People talk about revenge like it is something you decide in a moment of heat. A door slams, a voice is raised, something breaks that cannot be put back together, and in that moment, a person decides to make someone pay. That is not what this was. What I built over those 14 months was not revenge. It was a firewall. There is a difference, and the difference matters. I want to explain it clearly, because what I am about to tell you is the part that most people get wrong when they hear this story. Margaret and I began meeting in August of 2024. Not at her office, at a diner on the east side of Nashville called Patsy's, where the coffee is strong and the booths have high backs, and the lunch crowd is loud enough that a conversation between two people doesn't carry. We met there 6 times over 4 months. We always ordered the same thing. Coffee for me, tea for Margaret, and a slice of whatever pie they had that day. Because Margaret believes that difficult conversations go better with pie, and after 31 years, I have learned not to argue with her on this. The plan had 3 parts. The first part was the LLC. A limited liability company is a separate legal entity, its own name, its own tax identification number, its own bank accounts, its own contracts. When you transfer equipment or business agreements into an LLC, those assets belong to the company, not to you personally. That matters enormously when someone is trying to take what is yours because they cannot take what is not in your name. Margaret filed the paperwork for Callaway Iron Works LLC in September of 2024. Although Noah was the legal owner of the LLC, I did not expect him to run a multi-million-dollar operation overnight. Margaret prepared a management agreement that allowed experienced people to oversee daily operations until Noah gained the knowledge and confidence to take that responsibility. I had talked to Noah before filing. Not about all of it, he was too young to carry that weight, and I was not certain enough yet to lay it on him. I told him I was restructuring for tax purposes and that I wanted him to have a stake in the business before I retired. He said, "Grandpa, I don't know anything about running a shop." I said, "You will." He signed where Margaret told him to sign and went back to his sophomore year of college, and I went back to moving pieces into place. The second part was the transfer. Over the following 8 months, every major piece of equipment in the original shop was either sold to Callaway Iron Works at fair market value or leased to it under a formal agreement. The Haas CNC mill that I had bought in 2011 and rebuilt twice. The Mazak lathe that Ray could run blindfolded. The plasma cutter, the welding stations, the inspection equipment. All of it moved one transaction at a time, documented properly, valued, honestly recorded with the state. The Harold Finch contract was renegotiated and assigned to Callaway Iron Works in March. Finch knew because I told him, and he signed the new agreement without objection. Because in 19 years, I had never given him a reason to object to anything I asked. Callaway Precision Works, the original company, the one with my name on the sign above the door, was left with 3 aging pieces of equipment, worth perhaps $40,000, combined 2 contracts that were expiring within 90 days, and a penalty clause from a commercial client I had allowed to lapse deliberately. The building lease was in my personal name and would not transfer automatically. The sign still said Callaway. The parking lot still had my truck in it every morning. From the outside, nothing had changed. From the inside, it was a shell. The third part was Gloria. Gloria Reed had been my head bookkeeper for 11 years. She is precise and quiet, and she notices things the way good accountants always do not. Because they are looking for, but because numbers that do not add up bother them the way a rattling engine bothers me. I had trusted her with the financials of Callaway Ironworks from the beginning, and in January of 2025, she came to me with a printout. "Mr. Callaway," she said, setting it on my desk, "someone has been accessing the accounting system remotely. I found it in the access logs. The IP address doesn't match any of our registered devices." I looked at the printout. 41 remote access events over 6 months, all of them between 10 at night and 2 in the morning, all of them originating from the same residential IP address. I recognized it immediately. It was the home network I shared with Carol. "How much did they see?" I asked. Gloria folded her hands on the desk the way she does when she is about to deliver news she does not enjoy delivering. "Everything in the original company's records," she said. "But nothing from Ironworks. That system has a separate login, and she never had the credentials." I thanked her and asked her to preserve the logs with timestamps and print 2 certified copies, one for my files and one for Margaret. Gloria did not ask why. She simply said, "I'll have them ready by Friday," and walked back to her desk, and I sat in my office listening to the shop floor and understanding with a clarity I had been working toward for months that the firewall had held exactly where it needed to hold. Carol had been feeding them information for nearly a year. She had seen the original company's books, the equipment lists, the contract values, the revenue figures. She had given Jason and Diane a detailed picture of everything I appeared to own. She had never seen Callaway Ironworks, not one page of it. Noah turned onto Fifth Avenue and the Ranger slowed to a crawl in the morning traffic. Ahead of us, a brick building with green awnings and a second-floor window with the lights already on. "That's Margaret's office," I said. "I know," Noah said. "I've driven past it 100 times." He looked at me. "Grandpa, they thought they knew exactly what they were taking." "Yes," I said. "But they were looking at the wrong company the whole time." I nodded slowly. "They were very thorough," I said. "They just weren't thorough enough." Eleanor Margaret Callaway died on a Wednesday morning in October of 2015. She had been sick for 14 months, the same length of time I have thought about that more than once. And she died the way she had lived, which is to say quietly and without making it harder on anyone around her than it needed to be. The hospice nurse told me she passed just before sunrise. I was holding her hand. The window was open because she liked the smell of morning air, and the last thing I remember from that room is the sound of birds starting up outside, and Eleanor's breathing slowing and then stopping, and the particular quality of silence that follows when someone you have loved for 41 years is no longer in the world. I did not remarry quickly. People expected me to. I was 62 years old, and I had a house and a business and friends who meant well, and within a year of Eleanor's passing, there were dinners arranged and introductions made, and gentle suggestions from people who loved me that I should not be alone. I resisted for almost 2 years. Then I met Carol at a church fundraiser in the spring of 2017, and she was warm and capable, and she laughed easily, and she seemed to understand that I was not looking to replace anyone, only to have someone to sit across the table from at the end of the day. We married that September. I was 64. I thought I was being careful. Before the wedding, Margaret drew up a prenuptial agreement. That is a legal contract signed before marriage that establishes which assets belong to each person individually and cannot be claimed by the other in the event of divorce or death. The lake house was Eleanor's house. Eleanor had chosen it. Eleanor had loved it. And I was not willing to see it become a point of negotiation in any future proceeding. The shop was mine, built from nothing over 40 years. The retirement accounts were mine. Margaret was thorough as she always is, and Carol signed without objection, and I told myself that her willingness to sign without argument was a sign of her character. I still believe that was true when she signed it. I believe people change. I believe the change in Carol was gradual, and that it was influenced by people she trusted, and that by the time she was photographing my computer screen at midnight and sending the images to Jason, she had convinced herself she was doing something reasonable. That does not excuse it. But I have lived long enough to know that most betrayals do not begin with evil intent. They begin with want, and they grow in the dark. And by the time they are fully formed, the person carrying them has stopped being able to see them clearly. Noah was quiet for a moment after I said that. Then he said, "That's a generous way to think about someone who did what she did." "It is," I agreed. Eleanor would have told me I was being too generous. She had a clearer eye for people than I did. I looked at my hands again. She wrote about it, actually, in her journal. She kept one for most of our marriage, nothing elaborate, just a small green notebook she filled a few pages of every week. After she passed, I read all of them. 31 notebooks going back to 1986. Noah glanced at me. "What did she write about Carol?" "She never met Carol," I said. "But she wrote something in her last notebook about 6 weeks before she died that I have thought about every day since." I paused, hearing Eleanor's voice as clearly as I ever did. She wrote, "Be careful who you let sit in your kitchen in the morning. Not because the morning is dangerous, because it is when people are most themselves, and if the person across the table from you is performing, rather than simply being you, will eventually feel the effort of it, even if you cannot name what you are feeling." The Ranger rolled to a stop at a red light. A city bus pulled up beside us, its diesel engine loud and close. "I felt the effort," I said. "I felt it for 2 years before I admitted it to myself. Carol made coffee every morning and brought it to my desk when I was working, and it felt like care. And some mornings it was care, and other mornings it was information gathering, and I could not always tell the difference because I did not want to." My voice stayed level. I was practiced at keeping it level when I talked about Carol. "She photographed my screen 41 times, Noah. 41 separate nights between 10 and 2 in the morning while I was asleep down the hall. She sent the images to Jason and Diane, and they used them to build their picture of what I owned and what it was worth." "And she knew you knew?" Noah asked. "No," I said. That was important. I could not let her know I had found out. The moment Carol understood that I was aware of what she was doing, she would have told Jason, and the timeline would have accelerated. So I did what I have always done when I find a problem in a piece of equipment I am still running. Noah looked at me. "So I worked around it," I said. "I kept logging into the old system the same way I always had. I left the same kind of information visible that she expected to see. Revenue figures that were real but incomplete. Equipment lists that were accurate for Callaway Precision Works and said nothing about Ironworks. I gave her enough truth to keep her comfortable and not enough to show her what I was actually doing." The light changed. Noah pulled forward slowly. "Ray knew," I said. "Ray figured it out sometime in November, the way Ray figures most things out, by watching and saying nothing until he was certain. He came to me one morning before the crew arrived and said without any preamble at all, 'You want me to make sure the Ironworks documents don't end up anywhere near the main office computer?' I told him yes. He said, 'Already done.' And that was the entire conversation." Noah exhaled. And for the first time that morning, something that might have been a small, reluctant sound of admiration came through in his breath. "Raise a good man," he said. "The best kind," I said. "The kind that doesn't need to be asked twice. Diane is the one people always underestimate. That is not an accident. She has cultivated it deliberately, the way a patient gardener cultivates a hedge, trimming it carefully year after year until it looks exactly the way she wants it to look from the outside. She was a registered nurse for 11 years before she stopped working to raise her children. She knows more about cardiac medication than most people you will ever meet. She knows what drugs interact with what foods, and she knows which interactions are dangerous, and she knows how to discuss these things in a clinical, helpful tone that makes her sound like exactly what she presents herself as, a concerned daughter who happens to have a medical background and wants to make sure her father is getting the best possible care. Every morning for 9 days, Diane walked into my hospital room at Vanderbilt carrying a mason jar. The jar was wrapped in a cloth napkin, the kind with a small embroidered flower at the corner that Eleanor used to keep in the linen drawer. I noticed the napkin. I thought it was a kind touch. Diane said she had been juicing fresh fruit every morning before she came orange and grapefruit. She said because the vitamin C was good for healing and the natural sugars would help my energy levels. She said this with the confidence of a person who has studied the body and understands it, and the nurses smiled when she came in, and I drank the juice every day for the first 6 days, because I was 72 years old, and my chest had been cut open, and my daughter was bringing me something she had made with her own hands. And that felt, in those early, fragile days, like love. On the 7th day, Dr. Alan Miller came to review my chart. He was a careful man, methodical in the way that good cardiac physicians always are. He did not rush, he did not assume, and he did not like surprises in his data. My blood work had been inconsistent since the surgery. The warfarin levels were fluctuating in a pattern he could not fully account for. The amiodarone was not maintaining the therapeutic range he expected. He had adjusted my dosages twice already, which was more than he typically needed to do at this stage of recovery. He sat down in the chair beside my bed and asked me to walk him through everything I had been eating and drinking. I told him. When I mentioned the grapefruit juice, he stopped writing. "How much?" he asked. "A full jar," I said. "Every morning. My daughter brings it." Dr. Alan Miller set his pen down on the chart. He looked at me with the expression of a man who is choosing his next words very carefully. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "grapefruit and grapefruit juice contain compounds called furanocoumarins. These compounds block a specific enzyme in your digestive system, CYP3A4, that is responsible for metabolizing several cardiac medications, including both warfarin and amiodarone. When that enzyme is blocked, the drug concentration in your blood increases unpredictably. Too much warfarin raises your bleeding risk significantly. Disrupted amiodarone levels affect your heart rhythm in ways we cannot always anticipate." He paused. "I included grapefruit on your restricted foods list on your first day here. It is on the printed sheet your family received at admission." I looked at him. "The sheet that was given to my family." "To whoever was present at intake," he said carefully. "I believe it was your daughter." Noah's hands tightened on the steering wheel as I told him this. His knuckles went white the same way they had in Task 3, the same unconscious grip, and I watched it happen without commenting on it, because some things deserve to be felt without interruption. Dr. Alan Miller had made a note in my chart that morning. I asked Margaret to obtain a certified copy of the medical records 2 weeks later, and I read the notation myself. Possible dietary interference with cardiac medication regimen. Patient counseled. Family member advised to discontinue outside food and beverages. No further outside nutrition permitted without physician approval. Diane had never brought the jar again after that morning. She came every evening as she always kissed my cheek, called me her hero in front of the nurses, and brought me nothing but her smile and her careful questions about how I was feeling. She never mentioned the grapefruit. She never asked why she was no longer allowed to bring food. She simply stopped the way a person stops doing something when they understand that it has been noticed, and she went on being exactly what she had always appeared to be. She knew, Noah said. His voice had dropped to something very quiet and very certain. From the first day, she knew about the grapefruit. She knew, I said. She is a registered nurse with 11 years of cardiac ward experience. The interaction between grapefruit and those medications is one of the most well-documented drug-food interactions in clinical practice. It is covered in the first year of nursing school. The ranger turned onto Fifth Avenue, and I could see Margaret's building ahead of us, the green awnings and the second-floor light still burning. The medical record is in Margaret's folder, I said. Page 14. Dr. Alan Miller's notation, certified and dated. It doesn't accuse Diane of anything. It simply records what happened and when and what the physician observed. I looked at my hands. It doesn't need to accuse her. The dates speak for themselves. The admission intake sheet with her signature at the bottom speaks for itself. 11 years of cardiac nursing experience speaks for itself. Noah pulled to the curb in front of the building and put the truck in park. He sat for a moment without moving, both hands still on the wheel, staring at the brick facade of the building in front of us. "Grandpa," he said finally, and his voice came out rough and young and cracked straight down the middle. "How did you sit there and drink it every morning and not say anything?" I thought about that for a moment. "Because I needed her to believe she was winning," I said. "And because Dr. Alan Miller caught it in time. And because some battles, Noah, you win by staying in your chair and letting the other person show you exactly who they are." I reached for the door handle. She showed me. Now Margaret has the paperwork to prove it. That is enough. I opened the door and stepped out into the September morning. Margaret's building smelled the way it always had: old paper and wood polish, and the particular warmth of a place where serious work has been done for a long time. The staircase to the second floor was narrow, and the third step from the top creaked, and I had climbed those stairs more times than I could count over 31 years. And the creak on that third step was as familiar to me as the sound of my own shop in the morning. Some things anchor you to yourself when everything else is shifting. That staircase was one of mine. Margaret was standing at the door when we reached the top. She looked at Noah first, then at me, and she said, "You look better than I expected." I said, "You set a low bar." She almost smiled and stepped back to let us in. Her conference room had not changed in 20 years. The same long oak table, the same 6 chairs, the same window overlooking Fifth Avenue, where the morning traffic was building slowly. She had coffee waiting and a legal pad at my usual seat, and a second chair pulled close to mine, which told me she had already accounted for Noah being there. Margaret accounts for everything. It is why I have trusted her for 3 decades. We sat down. Noah kept his jacket on, which meant he was still running on adrenaline and had not yet let himself feel how tired he was. I understood that. I had been running on the same thing for 11 days. "Before we go through the folder," I said to Margaret, "Noah has something you need to hear about." Margaret looked at my grandson. "All right," she said. Noah reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set a small black USB drive on the table between us. It was no larger than a thumb scratched along one edge, the kind that comes in a multi-pack from a drugstore and gets lost in desk drawers and forgotten in jacket pockets, and turned up months later with no memory of what is on them. I found it in my father's office, Noah said. About a week ago. I went back to the house to pick up some clothes for Grandpa, and I went upstairs to get them from his room. The USB was on the desk under a printed spreadsheet. I thought it was mine at first. I took it without really thinking about it. Margaret picked it up and turned it over in her fingers. And when you realized it wasn't yours, Noah's jaw worked for a moment. I was back at my dorm. I plugged it in because I thought it might have my notes from last semester on it. He stopped. It had one file, an audio file, named Family Meeting August 3rd. Margaret set the drive down carefully on the legal pad in front of her. "Tell me what was on it," she said. I let Noah tell it. He deserved to tell it himself, and Margaret needed to hear it in his words, because Noah was the one who had carried it for a week alone, and the weight of that kind of knowledge at 19 years old is not a small thing. He told her about the voices, Jason first, then Diane, then Melissa, then Carol. He told her about the division of assets, the shop, the lake house, the retirement accounts. He told her about Sunset Valley Care Center, the name and the address, and the way Jason had said it matter-of-factly, the way you discuss logistics rather than a person. He told her about the line that had kept him awake all night after he first heard it. His own father's voice saying, once the paperwork is signed, we move him fast. He won't have the energy to fight us. When Noah finished, the room was quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when the thing that has just been said is too large to respond to immediately. Margaret picked up her pen. Tennessee is a one-party consent state, she said, her voice even and professional. That means an audio recording is legally admissible as evidence in civil proceedings if at least one person present during the recorded conversation consented to the recording. If the recording device belonged to someone in that room or was placed there by someone who was present, the recording is clean. She looked at the USB. Do you know who made this recording? Noah shook his head. I don't know. It was just there. Margaret looked at me. I may have asked Ray to do something with a small digital recorder approximately 10 days before that meeting. I said after Gloria showed me the access logs and I understood the timeline of what was being planned. Ray had temporary access to Jason's house because Jason had previously asked him to help with maintenance while he was away. He never returned the spare key, and Ray kept it only for that purpose. I paused. Ray is thorough. Margaret wrote something on her legal pad. Ray was not present at the meeting. Ray is never present anywhere he is not invited, I said. He simply occasionally leaves things behind. Margaret looked at me over her reading glasses for a moment. The particular look she had given me perhaps a dozen times over 3 decades, which meant she was professionally obligated not to know everything I had just implied, and personally satisfied with the result. She wrote something else on the pad. I will have this analyzed and transcribed by end of week, she said. Combined with Gloria's access logs, Dr. Alan Miller's medical notation, and the asset transfer documentation, this changes the character of everything we already had. She folded her hands on the table. Thomas, are you ready to show them what the last 14 months actually built? I looked at the USB drive sitting on her legal pad. Such a small thing to carry so much. So I have been ready since August of 2024, so, I said. Noah exhaled beside me, long and slow and careful, the breath of a person who has been holding something in for longer than they realized. He reached over and put his hand flat on the table between us, not reaching for mine, just placing it there the way young men sometimes do when they want to be present without making a production of it. I put my hand over his and left it there. Show us the folder, I said to Margaret. Show us everything. Margaret set the folder on the table the way she set everything down deliberately without ceremony, with the quiet confidence of someone who has spent 3 decades understanding that the weight of a document comes from what is inside it, not from how it is presented. The folder was dark green, thick as a paperback novel, held shut with a rubber band that she removed and set to one side before she opened the cover. Noah leaned forward in his chair. The first page was the LLC formation document for Callaway Ironworks. Margaret slid it toward Noah and let him read it without rushing him. His eyes moved down the page and stopped at his own name printed in clean black type in the registered owner field. Noah Allen Callaway. He stared at it for a moment, then looked at me, and I watched something move across his face that was not quite surprise and not quite understanding, but somewhere between the two. The look of a person beginning to grasp the full shape of something they had only seen pieces of before. This was filed 14 months ago, he said. September of 2024, Margaret confirmed. 2 months after your grandfather first contacted me with his concerns. Noah set the page down carefully, the way you set something down when you are not sure you are allowed to touch it. Margaret moved through the folder methodically. The equipment transfer records came next, each major asset from Callaway Precision Works, documented with a transfer date, a fair market valuation, and a signed agreement moving it into the LLC. The Haas mill, the Mazak lathe, the plasma cutter. 14 individual transfers over 8 months, each one clean and properly recorded with the Tennessee Secretary of State. Then the Finch contract reassignment, signed by Harold Finch himself in March. His signature large and unhurried at the bottom of the page, the way it had always been in 19 years of doing business together. Noah picked up the Finch document and read it slowly. He knew, Noah asked. Harold Finch has known me for 19 years, I said. I told him the truth, that I was restructuring for succession planning, and that I wanted the contract under the new entity before I retired. He said, and I am quoting him exactly, "Thomas, you could put this contract in your dog's name and I'd still honor it." I paused. We do not have a dog. But the sentiment held. Noah set the Finch document down and almost smiled, and I was glad to see it even briefly, because what was coming next in the folder was harder. Margaret laid Gloria's printout on the table. 2 pages of access log data, the IP addresses highlighted in yellow, the timestamps running down the right margin in a column that told its own story without needing explanation. 41 entries, all of them between 10 at night and 2 in the morning, all of them from Carol's home network. Noah looked at the timestamps for a long moment. His jaw was tight. She was doing it while you slept, he said. While I slept, I said. For the better part of a year. Margaret turned to the next section. Dr. Alan Miller's medical notation, certified and dated 2 pages from my hospital record. The language was clinical and precise and entirely without accusation, which made it paradoxically more damning than any accusation could have been. Possible dietary interference with cardiac medication regimen. Patient counseled. Family member advised to discontinue outside food and beverages. The date in the upper right corner was September 9th, the 7th day of my hospital stay, 2 days before Noah had found the USB, 3 days before my discharge. Below the medical record, Margaret had paperclipped a single sheet. Noah picked it up and read it, and his expression shifted in a way that made my chest ache. This is the hospital intake form, he said. Page 3, Margaret said. The dietary restrictions list. Signed at the bottom. Noah read the name on the signature line. He set the page down without a word, but his hand was trembling, and he pressed it flat against the table to make it stop. And I watched him do it, and said nothing because some things a person has to absorb in their own time. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed one more item on the table. A folded piece of notepaper, small and slightly worn at the creases from being carried. I had written it the night nurse Emily Carter had slipped her personal cell phone through the gap in my hospital room door and whispered, "10 minutes, Mr. Calloway, don't call out." Nurse Emily Carter was 26 years old and had worked the cardiac recovery floor at Vanderbilt for 3 years. She had brought me an extra blanket on my 4th night without being asked. 2 days after Dr. Alan Miller's notation, when Carol had begun limiting my outgoing calls with the explanation that I needed to rest and too much stimulation was bad for recovery, Nurse Emily Carter had noticed. She had not said anything to Carol. She had come to me on her break, stood in the doorway of my room, and said very quietly, "Is there someone you need to contact?" I had written Margaret's number on the corner of a tissue and folded it into Nurse Emily Carter's palm during a blood pressure check. That evening, Margaret received a text from an unknown number. 4 words. Day after discharge. Ready. Noah looked at the folded notepaper on the table. "You got word out through a nurse," he said. "Through a good person," I said. There is a difference. Nurse Emily Carter did not know what she was helping with. She only knew that a 72-year-old man with a recent open-heart surgery was being prevented from making phone calls, and that this did not sit right with her. I looked at the notepaper. The world runs on people like that. People who notice when something is wrong and act on it without needing to know the whole story. Margaret closed the folder and folded her hands on top of it. "Thomas," she said, "everything here is documented, dated, and defensible. The LLC, the transfers, the logs, the medical record, the intake form, and the recording." She looked at me steadily. "What happens next is your decision, but I want you to understand clearly you have built something that will hold." I looked at the folder sitting closed on the table between us. 14 months of silence sitting in a green folder on an oak table on a Friday morning in September. "I know," I said. "Now let us talk about a party." Margaret looked at me across the table for a long moment after I said it. Then she uncapped her pen and pulled the legal pad toward her. "Tell me what you have in mind," she said. I told her. It took about 20 minutes. Noah sat beside me and listened without interrupting, which told me he was beginning to understand how these things worked, that the plan was already built, and that what I needed from him now was not input, but presence. When I finished, Margaret had filled 4 pages of her legal pad in her small, precise handwriting, and she sat back in her chair and looked at what she had written the way she always did when she was stress-testing an idea, moving through it from the outside, looking for the places where it could fail. "The contract language," she said finally. "I want to be precise about the as's clause. No ambiguity." "No ambiguity," I agreed. "Jason will not read it carefully. That is his choice and his consequence. But the language must be airtight, so that when he challenges it, and he will challenge it, there is nothing to hold on to." Margaret nodded and made a note. "I will have it ready by Tuesday." We left her office at 10:30 that morning. Noah drove me to the Riverside Inn on the south side of Nashville, a small, clean motel with a gravel parking lot and a row of Bradford pear trees along the fence that were just beginning to turn at the edges. The room had faded carpet, the color of old mustard, and an air conditioning unit that rattled when it cycled on, and I spent 15 minutes adjusting the front panel before I unpacked my bag, because the rattle was unnecessary, and unnecessary things bother me. Old habits do not ask permission before they show up. I stayed at the Riverside Inn for 3 days before they came. I had expected 2 days. They were faster than I anticipated, which told me they were more frightened than they had let themselves appear. Fear and greed move at the same speed when they are pointed in the same direction. It was a Saturday afternoon when Jason's truck pulled into the parking lot. I was sitting in the chair by the window reading when I heard the gravel crunch. I did not move the curtain. I simply watched through the gap at the edge and counted. Jason's black truck, Diane's silver sedan behind it, Carol's car last parking slightly apart from the others the way she always did, as though maintaining the option to leave quickly. They knocked together. Jason in front, Diane beside him, Carol a half step back, Melissa just behind Carol. All four of them, which meant they had coordinated the visit and decided that a unified front was their strongest position. They were right about that. It was their strongest position. It was also the position that told me the most about how worried they were. I opened the door and looked at them. Jason had flowers. A gas station bouquet, the kind wrapped in plastic with a rubber band around the stems, slightly wilted at the edges, from sitting in a bucket of water under fluorescent light. He held them out with a smile that reached his eyes with some effort and said, "Dad, we've been worried sick." I stepped back and let them in. The room was small for 5 people. Jason and Diane took the 2 chairs. Carol sat on the edge of the bed. Melissa stood near the door with her arms at her sides and her face arranged in an expression of careful concern. I leaned against the dresser and looked at all 4 of them and felt something settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the surgery. A particular stillness that comes when you have been waiting a long time for something, and it has finally arrived exactly as you expected. Jason did most of the talking. He was good at talking. He told me how worried they had all been, how difficult it had been, not knowing where I was, how much they wanted me to be comfortable and taken care of. He said the house was ready for me. He said Carol had prepared the bedroom. He did not specify which bedroom. Diane reached over and put her hand on my arm. "Dad, we just want you home." I looked at her hand on my arm. Her nails were freshly done pale pink, the kind of detail a person attends to before an important meeting. "That is kind," I said. "I need a little more time to rest." Then Melissa spoke. She had been quiet long enough that the room had almost forgotten she was there, which I suspected was deliberate. "Thomas," she said, and her voice was warm and measured. "We were thinking you've been through so much. What if we sent you somewhere really nice to recover, a resort up in Gatlinburg? A month, all expenses paid. You could rest properly, no responsibilities, just fresh mountain air and good food and time to heal." She said it beautifully. I will give her that. She had practiced it or something close to it, and the delivery was nearly perfect, generous and selfless, and entirely without the quality of a person who had spent the previous 3 weeks selling a man's belongings on Facebook Marketplace while he was in the hospital. I looked at the 4 of them. Jason with his gas station flowers, Diane with her pale pink nails and her hand on my arm, Carol sitting carefully on the edge of the bed, watching me with the expression of a woman performing the role of concerned wife, Melissa standing near the door waiting for my answer with a stillness that was not calm but controlled. I let the silence hold for exactly long enough. "That sounds lovely," I said slowly, letting my voice carry just enough fatigue to be convincing. "Let me think about it. A few more days." Jason's shoulders dropped by perhaps 1/4 of an inch. The involuntary release of a man who has been holding tension and just received the answer he needed. He smiled, and this time the smile came more easily. "Of course, Dad," he said. "Take all the time you need." They left 20 minutes later. I watched the 3 vehicles pull out of the parking lot from the gap in the curtain. Then I picked up my phone and called Margaret. "They took it," I said. A brief pause. All four, together." Good, Margaret said. I will call Jason Monday morning to schedule the contract signing. Tuesday afternoon, my office. I set the phone down on the nightstand and looked at the gas station bouquet Jason had left on the dresser. The plastic wrap was still on it. He had not thought to take it off. Tuesday, I said to the empty room. Jason arrived 12 minutes early. I know, because I was already in Margaret's conference room when I heard the street door open downstairs, and I checked my watch out of habit. And it was 11:48 in the morning. The signing was scheduled for noon. 12 minutes early meant he had been circling the block or sitting in his truck down the street, too eager to stay away, but too aware of himself to arrive obviously early. He split the difference with 12 minutes, which told me everything I needed to know about the state of his confidence that morning. He was wearing a new shirt. Not a jacket, not a suit, but a new shirt, dark blue collar, pressed, the kind of shirt a man wears when he wants to look serious, without appearing to have tried too hard. His boots were the same clean ones he had worn to the shop 3 months ago. He shook Margaret's hand at the door and said her name with the easy familiarity of a man who wanted her to feel that they were on the same side. Margaret showed him into the conference room. I was sitting at the far end of the table. Jason stopped when he saw me just for a half second, and something moved across his face that he recovered from quickly. He had not expected me to be there. He had expected this to be a meeting between himself and Margaret, with my signature already handled separately. That was the version of this morning he had constructed in his mind, and my presence at the end of the table was the first crack in it. "Dad," he said, and crossed the room to grip my hand. His handshake was firm and warm. "Good to see you up and around." "Thank you for coming," I said. Margaret set the contract on the table between us. It was 4 pages double-spaced, the language clean and direct, the way Margaret always wrote it. The title at the top read, "Agreement for Transfer of Business Operations, Callaway Precision Works." Below the title, the address of the shop on Callaway Road. Below that, the Asses clause printed in the same font as everything else, neither larger nor smaller, making no more or less of itself than any other paragraph on the page. Jason picked it up and began to read. I watched him. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I have thought about it many times since, and I believe honesty about it matters. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel the particular warmth that people sometimes describe when they talk about justice being served. What I felt watching my 44-year-old son read a 4-page contract with the focused expression of a man who has already decided to sign it and is reading primarily to confirm that nothing will stop him was grief. Plain and heavy and old, the kind that has been waiting in a particular corner of your chest for so long that you have almost stopped noticing it is there until something makes you notice it all at once. I had wanted him to read it carefully. That is the truth. I had wanted him to slow down at the Asses clause and ask a question, any question, the way a careful man would. I had wanted somewhere beneath everything I had built over 14 months for my son to be smarter than this. Not for my sake. For his. He was not going to be. He reached the 3rd page. His eyes moved down the columns of legal language with the speed of a man looking for his name at the bottom, rather than absorbing what came before it. Margaret sat across from him, with her hands folded and her expression professionally neutral. And I sat at the end of the table and watched my son not read the contract that was going to define the next chapter of his life. He reached the signature line on page 4. "Looks good," he said, and reached for the pen Margaret had placed beside the document. Margaret said quietly, "Take your time, Jason. There is no rush." He looked up at her with a brief smile. "I trust you, Margaret." He said it warmly as though it were a compliment. as though trusting the attorney representing the other party in a business transaction were a sign of confidence rather than a failure of judgment. He signed his name. The pen made a small, clean sound against the paper. Jason set it down and straightened in his chair with the easy movement of a man who has just completed something he has been anticipating for a long time. He looked at me with an expression I recognized, not quite triumph, because he was too practiced to show triumph directly, but the particular relaxation of a person who believes the hard part is over. "So," he said. "What happens next?" I looked at my son across the table. At the jaw that was mine and the eyes that were Eleanor's and the new blue shirt and the clean boots and the signed contract sitting between us on Margaret's oak table. I thought about Tuesday dinners at the barbecue place on 7th Street and a spiral notebook full of asset valuations hidden under a printed spreadsheet and a gas station bouquet with the plastic wrap still on it, sitting on the dresser of a motel room. "When there is a gathering at the lake house on Friday evening," I said, "I would like the whole family there, everyone who matters." Jason nodded slowly. "Of course, absolutely." He was already thinking past the conversation. I could see it. His mind was on phone calls to make on the developer whose number was in his contacts, on the shape of a future he had been drawing in his head for months. "I will let everyone know." He stood and shook my hand again at the door. His grip was the same firm, warm, unhurried. When the street door closed behind him, Margaret walked back into the conference room and sat down across from me. She did not say anything immediately. She poured coffee from the carafe on the side table and set a cup in front of me and one in front of herself, and we sat for a moment in the particular quiet of a room where something significant has just occurred. "He did not read the as-is clause," she said finally. It was not a question. "No," I said. "He did not." Margaret wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Thomas, are you all right?" I looked at the signature on page 4 of the contract. "I will be," I said. "Friday will help." Eleanor picked that house on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2001. We had been driving back from a hardware run, which was how we spent a lot of our Sunday afternoons in those years. One errand, becoming two, becoming three, the truck cab, warm and smelling of coffee from the thermos she kept on the floor by her feet. We came around a bend on County Road 14, and there it was, set back from the road behind a stand of maple trees that were burning red and gold in the October light. A white farmhouse with a covered porch, and a dock running out over the water, and a weather vane on the barn roof that had been turning in Tennessee wind for longer than either of us had been alive. Eleanor said without preamble or build-up, "Thomas, that is where I want to grow old." I bought it the following spring. I had not been back since the previous Christmas, which was the last time the house had felt like a place I was welcome in without condition. In the months after Eleanor passed, I had come often sometimes just to sit on the porch in the morning with coffee and listen to the water. After Carol moved in, the visits became less frequent, then occasional, then planned in advance and scheduled around other people's preferences. The house was still. The prenuptial agreement Margaret had drawn up before our marriage ensured that Eleanor's house remained separate property, untouched by any claim Carol could make. But the feeling of belonging to it had been slowly, quietly taken from me, the way warmth leaves a room when someone opens a window and forgets to close it. Ray met me there on Thursday morning, the day before the party. He pulled up in his work truck and climbed out without ceremony and stood in the driveway looking at the house with his hands on his hips, the way he looked at equipment that needed attention. Ray had been to the lake house perhaps a dozen times over the years, helping me replace the dock planks one summer, fixing the water heater. The winter it failed, painting the porch railing the spring. Eleanor came home from her first round of treatment and said she wanted the house to look cheerful. He knew the place. He moved through it with the ease of a man who has worked in enough spaces to feel comfortable in any of them. "What do you need?" he said. I showed him the living room. The far wall had a mounted television that Carol had installed 2 years ago, connected to a streaming device with an HDMI port. Ray looked at it for a moment, then looked at me, and I handed him a small flash drive, the copy Margaret had made of the audio file from Noah's USB combined with the screenshots Gloria had prepared of the group chat messages formatted for playback on a standard media player. Ray turned the drive over in his fingers. When Jason starts his speech," I said, "he will stand up and reach into his jacket pocket for the paper he has written. When his hand goes to his pocket, you press play." Ray nodded once. He did not ask why. He did not ask what was on the drive, though he already knew, because Ray knows most things without being told. He simply put the drive in his shirt pocket and said, "I will be near the kitchen. Good sightline to the room from there." We spent the rest of the morning making the house look like what it was, a home, not a stage. I did not want it to look arranged. I wanted it to look like a place where a family was gathering because they loved each other, because that was the lie the other side of the room was planning to perform, and the truth is always more convincing when it shares the same set. Pastor Dennis Webb arrived that afternoon. He was 65 years old and had known me for 30 years, and he came because I had asked him to come and because in 30 years I had never asked him for anything I did not genuinely need. He walked through the front door with a casserole his wife had made and set it on the kitchen counter, and looked at me with the steady eyes of a man who has sat beside enough people in enough difficult rooms to know when one is approaching. "How are you holding up?" he said. "I am standing," I said. "That is enough for today." He nodded and did not push further. That was one of the things I had always valued about Dennis. He understood that some people process things by talking, and some people process things by doing. And he had never once tried to turn me into the first kind. Noah arrived late that afternoon. He had driven from his dormitory after his last class, still in his campus clothes, a backpack over one shoulder, and he stood in the doorway of the lake house and looked at the living room and the water beyond the window and the maple trees in the yard that were the same burning red and gold his grandmother had fallen in love with 24 years ago. "This is a good house," he said quietly. "It is," I said. Eleanor knew at the moment she saw it. He set his backpack down and came to stand beside me at the window. Outside, the late afternoon light was coming off the water in long, flat angles, the kind that only happens in September when the sun drops early and hits the surface straight on before it goes. We stood there for a moment, the two of us watching the light move on the water. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked. I thought about that honestly. I thought about 40 years of early mornings and long days and grease under my fingernails and the particular satisfaction of a machine running exactly as it should. I thought about Jason's new boots and Melissa's mason jars and Carol's midnight photographs and Diane's pale pink nails. I thought about Eleanor standing in a truck on County Road 14, pointing at a white house in October light, and knowing immediately that it was right. "I have been ready for 14 months, I said. "I just needed one more day." Pastor Dennis touched my arm as he passed behind us on his way to the kitchen. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Thomas," he said quietly, "you are not alone in this room." I nodded. Outside, the light faded slowly off the water, and the maple trees darkened from gold to rust to shadow, and the weather vane on the old barn turned slowly in the evening wind. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow it ends. Before I reveal the shocking confrontation and how the truth comes to light, type 777 or the word justice in the comments right now, so I know you're still here with me. And please note the following chapter contains dramatized fictional elements created for emotional storytelling. If this style of content isn't for you, feel free to turn off the video right here. For everyone else, let's dive into the climax. They came at 6 o'clock. The way people come to events they believe belong to them comfortably, without hurry, with the particular ease of people who have already decided how the evening ends. Jason arrived first. He had dressed for the occasion in a way that reminded me of the contract-signing new shirt-pressed collar, the look of a man preparing to receive something rather than give it. He moved through the front door of the lake house, shaking hands and greeting people with the warmth of a host. Though the house was not his, and the gathering was not his, and he had not been consulted on the guest list. He had simply assumed, and assumption had always been Jason's most reliable compass. Diane came in behind him with a bottle of wine and a smile that she distributed evenly across the room. Melissa followed, her phone in her hand, which she put away when she noticed me watching. Carol came last in a blue dress I had not seen before, and she touched my arm briefly when she passed and said, "This is a lovely idea, Thomas," in the tone of a woman who believes she is being gracious. The room filled steadily. Harold Finch came with his wife and shook my hand at the door and said, "Good to see you, Vertical Thomas." Ray's former assistant, Bobby, and his wife. 3 families from the road who had known me since I bought the property. 2 men from the trade association I had belonged to for 30 years. Pastor Dennis was already inside, standing near the fireplace with a glass of water, talking to Harold Finch's wife about her garden. Noah stayed close to the kitchen doorway, which put him 10 feet from Ray. I moved through the room, slowly speaking to people, accepting good wishes about my recovery, shaking hands, and accepting embraces from people who had known me for decades. I let the room warm up the way a good engine warms up gradually, without forcing it, letting everything reach operating temperature before you ask anything of it. Dinner was served at 7. Carol had arranged the catering, which I had suggested she do because it gave her something to organize, and organizing things made her feel central to an event, and I needed her to feel central to this one. The food was good. The conversation around the table was the kind that happens when people who genuinely like each other are gathered in one place and given something to eat and somewhere comfortable to sit. Jason watched me across the table. He was patient, I will give him that. He ate his dinner and talked to Harold Finch and laughed at the right moments and waited. He had the folded paper in his jacket pocket. I could see the slight bulk of it on his left side every time he leaned forward. He had written a speech. He had prepared for this moment. He was going to stand up and deliver it, and then produce the document and present it to me in front of everyone. And the witnesses in the room would make it real, and by morning the process would be in motion. He waited until dessert had been cleared. Then he stood up. The room shifted its attention toward him the way rooms do when someone stands with intention. He waited for the conversations to quiet, which they did within a few seconds, and he looked around the table with an expression that was warm and serious in equal measure, and he began. "I want to say something tonight," he said, "about my father." He spoke for perhaps 3 minutes. He talked about watching me build the shop from the time he was a boy, about the early mornings and the long days, and the pride he had always felt, he said, in what I had created. He talked about family and legacy, and the importance of making sure that what a man builds with his life is cared for properly after he is gone. His voice was steady, and his words were well chosen, and if I had not known what was in his jacket pocket and what was in his heart, I might have believed him entirely. He reached the end of the prepared portion and paused, and his hand moved toward his jacket pocket. From the kitchen doorway, Ray pressed play. The television on the far wall came to life. The room was quiet enough that the sound filled it completely, from the first word, Jason's own voice recorded in his own kitchen on the 3rd of August, clear and unhurried, and entirely without the warmth he had just been performing at the dinner table. "Once the paperwork is signed, we move him fast. He won't have the energy to fight us." Nobody moved. The room held its breath. Diane's voice came next, asking about the care facility. Then Melissa reading the address. Then Carol discussing the retirement account figures she had gathered. Then Jason again laughing softly at something Melissa said, the laugh of a man entirely comfortable with what he is planning. The laugh of a person who has never once considered that the room he is sitting in might not be as private as he believes. The recording ran for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I had timed it in Margaret's office. 4 minutes and 11 seconds, in which the room around the dinner table heard in the voices of the people sitting among them the complete architecture of what had been planned for me. When it ended, the silence was total. Jason's hand was still at his jacket pocket. His face had gone through several things in 4 minutes: confusion first, then recognition, then a particular kind of stillness that happens when a person understands that the ground beneath them has changed, and they have not yet figured out how far they have fallen. Harold Finch set his fork down on his dessert plate. The sound it made was very small and very loud. Pastor Dennis near the fireplace bowed his head. I sat at the head of the table with my hands folded in front of me and looked at my son standing with his hand at his jacket pocket. And I did not look away because he deserved to be looked at. And I had spent enough of my life looking somewhere else. Then the front door opened, and Margaret Oakes walked in carrying a folder. Margaret has a particular way of entering a room. She does not announce herself. She does not wait to be introduced. She simply walks in with the quiet authority of someone who knows exactly why she is there and exactly how long it will take. And the room tends to reorganize itself around her presence without being asked. She set the folder on the dining table and looked at Jason. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I believe you signed something in my office on Tuesday." Jason's jaw tightened. His hand had come away from his jacket pocket. The folded speech was still inside it, undelivered, which was going to stay that way. He looked at me, then at Margaret, then at the folder on the table, and I watched him make the calculation that people make when they are trying to determine how much trouble they are actually in and whether there is still a version of this evening that goes the way they planned. There was not. Margaret opened the folder and removed the first document. She placed it on the table in front of Jason with the signature page facing up, his name visible at the bottom in the same confident hand he had used 3 days ago when he believed he was collecting something. "The agreement you signed is an as-is transfer of business operations at 4401 Callaway Road," she said. She spoke clearly and without haste, the way she spoke in every professional setting, as though the number of people in the room had no bearing on her delivery. As-is means the business transfers in its current state with all existing assets and all existing liabilities exactly as they stand at the moment of signing. Jason said, "I understand what as-is means." "Good," Margaret said. "Then I will show you what it means in this particular case." She removed the second document. It was the asset inventory of Callaway Precision Works as of September 15th, the day Jason signed. 3 pieces of aging equipment with a combined resale value of $41,000. 2 contracts expiring within 60 days. And a penalty clause from a commercial account that had been allowed to lapse, resulting in an outstanding liability of $180,000. Jason stared at the page. "Where is the Haas Mill?" His voice had changed. The warmth was gone, and what was underneath it was thinner and harder. "The Mazak, the Finch contract. Where are the Callaway Iron Works, LLC?" Margaret said, "Holds all primary equipment and active contracts. That entity was established 14 months ago." She looked at him steadily. "It belongs to your son." The room was very still. I could hear the water outside through the open window, the small sound of the lake moving against the dock. Jason turned to me. His face had gone through anger, and arrived somewhere past it, somewhere that was less hot and more dangerous. You did this. You signed a contract without reading it, I said. I did not do that to you. Melissa spoke from across the table before Jason could answer. Her voice was cold and precise, stripped of every performance she had been giving all evening. You told me this was handled, she said to Jason. You told me you had reviewed everything. Jason turned to her. Melissa. Do not. The word came out flat and final. Do not say my name right now. It was the first honest thing anyone on that side of the table had said all evening, and it landed in the room accordingly. Diane pushed her chair back. She did not stand, she simply moved, putting distance between herself and Jason, the physical language of a person beginning the process of deciding they were never really part of something. She looked at Carol across the table, and the look she gave her was the kind that gets practiced over years of needing someone to blame when things go wrong. You told us the books were accurate, Diane said to Carol. You told us you had seen everything. Carol's chin lifted. I saw exactly what was in the system. I cannot be responsible for what was not there. You told us. I told you what I found. Carol's voice had sharpened. What I found was what he left for us to find. That is not my failure. That is yours for trusting a system you did not control. The three of them looked at each other across the wreckage of the evening, and what passed between them was not grief and not guilt, but the particular cold arithmetic of people deciding who among them is going to bear the cost of a mistake they all made together. Harold Finch stood up quietly from his chair. His wife stood with him. He looked at me across the table and gave a single nod, the nod of a man who has seen enough to understand everything and has decided that his presence here is no longer appropriate. Two other couples followed without speaking. The room was reducing itself the way rooms do after something has broken people, finding reasons to be elsewhere. Coates retrieved quiet goodbyes offered to me and not to anyone else. Margaret set one final document on the table in front of Carol. The lake house, she said simply, is separate property under the prenuptial agreement signed in September of 2017. It is not subject to any claim in divorce or separation proceedings. I wanted you to have that clearly in writing. Carol looked at the document. She looked at it for a long time. Then she folded her hands in her lap and said nothing, which was the most honest response she had given all evening. Melissa picked up her purse from the back of her chair. She looked at Jason with an expression I had seen on other faces in other difficult rooms, the expression of a person closing an account. I will have my attorney contact yours by Monday, she said. Then she walked to the front door and left without looking back. Jason sat in his chair with the unsigned speech still in his jacket pocket and the asset inventory in front of him and $180,000 of liability with his name on it. And he looked at me the way a person looks when they have finally run out of calculations. Dad, he said. His voice had gone quiet. Not tonight, I said. Not here. He closed his mouth. Outside, a car started in the driveway. Melissa leaving. Then another Harold Finch and his wife. One by one, the lights of departing cars swept across the window, and the room got quieter, and Jason sat very still in his chair. And I watched my son understand, for the first time in his life, the full weight of a choice he could not take back. The room emptied, the way rooms empty after something irreversible has happened, not all at once, but in a steady, quiet recession. Like water finding its way out through cracks you did not know were there. Pastor Dennis was the last guest to leave. He found me near the kitchen doorway and put his hand on my shoulder without saying anything, for a moment, the way he had done at Eleanor's funeral and at the hospital the year I had my appendix out, and at every difficult occasion in 30 years, when words were either too much or not enough. Then he said quietly, "I will call you tomorrow morning." I nodded and thanked him, and watched him walk down the porch steps into the dark. His car started at the end of the driveway, the headlights sweeping once across the maple trees, and then he was gone. Ray had broken down the laptop and coiled the HDMI cable and stacked them neatly by the door. He caught my eye from across the room, and I gave him a small nod, and he picked up his jacket and left without ceremony, the way Ray always left when the work was done. No speech, no lingering, no backward glance. Just a man who had done what he came to do and understood that the rest of the evening belonged to something he was not part of. That left the four of us. Jason was still at the table. He had not moved from his chair since Melissa walked out, and in the time since something in his posture had changed in a way that was difficult to describe. Not defeated exactly, but reduced the way a fire reduces when the fuel runs out, and what remains is smaller and quieter and gives off less heat than what was burning before. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, and he was looking at them the way a person looks at something familiar that has become suddenly strange. I had known those hands since they were small enough to fit inside one of mine. I had held them crossing parking lots and taught them to grip a wrench and watched them grow into the hands of a grown man. Tonight they looked like the hands of someone I was only beginning to understand I had never fully known. Carol sat at the far end of the table with her hands in her lap and her blue dress and her careful expression. And I understood, looking at her, that whatever she had hoped this evening would accomplish, she had already begun the process of deciding it was someone else's fault. That was Carol's particular gift, the ability to locate in any wreckage a version of events in which she had acted reasonably. I did not hate her for it. I had simply run out of energy to accommodate it. Diane stood near the window. She had been standing there for several minutes, long enough that I had noticed and said nothing because the window overlooked the dock and the water and the maple trees in the yard that Eleanor had loved, and I was willing to give anyone a moment with that view even tonight. Even after everything. The water outside was dark, and the trees were darker shapes against a sky that had gone fully black, and Diane stood with her arms at her sides and her shoulders slightly rounded, and for the first time all evening she looked exactly her age. Then she turned from the window and crossed the room to Noah. She reached into her purse and removed a small envelope. It was cream-colored, sealed with my name written on the front in the cursive that leaned slightly left, Eleanor's cursive, which Diane had inherited, without knowing it, which had always struck me as one of the stranger gifts that genetics bestows without permission. She pressed the envelope into Noah's hand, and her fingers lingered on it for just a moment before she let go. "I'll give this to your grandfather," she said. Her voice was low and her eyes were red at the corners, and her chin was doing the thing it had done since she was a little girl when she was trying very hard not to cry. "Please, tell him I'm sorry." Noah looked at her for a long moment. Whatever he was feeling, he kept it behind his face. Then he crossed the room and held the envelope out to me without a word, because Noah understood better than most people twice his age that some things do not require a comment. I recognized the handwriting before I took it. I sat down in the chair at the head of the table, Eleanor's chair, the one that faced the window and the water, and I opened the envelope carefully, the way you open something when you are not entirely sure what you are hoping to find inside and you want to give yourself time to prepare for either answer. The paper was a single sheet folded once. Diane's handwriting the same leftward lean as the envelope's 6 lines written in blue ink. It was not an apology. It was a request written in the language of someone who had not yet understood that the ground had shifted permanently beneath her feet. She asked me to consider, given everything that had happened, whether it might be possible to reconsider the disposition of the lake house. She noted that she had children who needed stability. She noted that she did not have many options. She noted in the final line that she had always loved this house, which was the first true thing on the page, and also the most painful, because loving a thing and being entitled to it are not the same. And somewhere in Diane's understanding of the world across 41 years of being my daughter, that distinction had never been made clearly enough, and I had to ask myself whether that was her failure or mine. I read it twice. Then I folded it along the same crease and set it on the table in front of me. The room was quiet. Outside, the water moved against the dock in the small, rhythmic sound it had been making since Eleanor first heard it in October of 2001, and decided without preamble, without deliberation, that this was the place. That sound had outlasted Eleanor. It would outlast this evening. It would outlast whatever came next. I looked at Diane. She was watching me from across the table with her eyes red and her hands clasped in front of her, and I understood that she was not performing now. The performance had ended when Melissa walked out, and the room began to empty. What I was looking at was my daughter who had Eleanor's cursive and Eleanor's cheekbones, and none of Eleanor's instinct for when to stop wanting something that wasn't hers to want. She was waiting to see if there was anything left to salvage. There was not. But I wanted her to understand why. I stood up. Jason looked at me from his chair. Carol raised her head. Noah stood near the kitchen doorway with his hands at his sides and his face very still, and the house was quiet around us, and the water was moving outside, and the maple trees were dark shapes against the sky. And I stood at the head of Eleanor's table in Eleanor's house with Diane's letter folded on the wood in front of me. "I want you to listen to me," I said. "All three of you." They listened. "I spent 40 years building something for this family," I said. "I worked before sunrise and after dark. I missed school plays and birthday dinners and Sunday mornings I cannot get back. I told myself it was for you. That the work was for you. That the sacrifice was for you." I stopped. The words needed room to land before the next ones followed. "Tonight I accept that I was wrong about what you needed. And I accept that whatever I failed to give you, whatever it was, that would have made you into people who could sit at this table with me, without an agenda, that failure belongs to me as much as it belongs to you." Diane's breath caught audibly. Jason did not move. "But I will not apologize," I said, "for protecting what I built. And I will not apologize for choosing the one person in this family who showed up without being asked, who asked for nothing, and who drove 300 miles in the dark because it was simply the right thing to do." I looked at each of them in turn. Jason with his hands flat on the table, Carol with her chin raised and her jaw tight, Diane with her red eyes and Eleanor's handwriting folded on the wood between us. "What you lost tonight is not my money," I said. "What you lost is a father. And that is not something any document can give back." I picked up Diane's letter. I folded it once more and set it carefully in my jacket pocket, because even now, even after all of it, it was the only thing in that house written in Eleanor's cursive, and I was not going to leave it on a table. Then I walked to the door and did not look back. Noah fell into step beside me on the porch, and the night air was cool and clean and smelled of lake water and the last of the autumn leaves. And somewhere behind us, the house was quiet in the way that houses go quiet when the thing they have been holding finally lets go. We drove away from the lake house at 9:30 that night. Noah was behind the wheel, and I was in the passenger seat, and neither of us spoke for the first several miles, which was not silence the way silence had been in other parts of this story, heavy and loaded, and waiting to become something. This was the other kind. The kind that comes after something large has concluded, and the people who were part of it need time to let it settle before they begin deciding what it means. The maple trees along the county road were dark shapes against a sky full of stars. I watched them pass and thought about Eleanor saying, "This is where I want to grow old," and I thought about 40 years of early mornings in a shop that smelled of machine oil and metal shavings, and the particular warmth of equipment that has been running long enough to find its rhythm, and I thought about a 19-year-old boy driving 300 miles in the dark because he could not think of a reason not to. Noah finally spoke somewhere around the 20-mile mark. "Where do we go now?" he said. "To the motel tonight," I said. "And tomorrow morning early we go to the shop." He nodded and drove and did not ask which shop because he already knew. We arrived at Callaway Ironworks just after 7 the following morning. The building sat on 12 acres off Route 9, a low steel structure with a gravel lot and a loading dock, and a sign above the door that Ray had installed 3 months earlier, black letters on white clean and without flourish, the way I had always preferred things to be presented. Callaway Ironworks, LLC. Noah read it standing in the parking lot with his hands in his jacket pockets and the October air moving around him, and I watched his face do the thing faces do when a name becomes real in a way it was not before. Ray's truck was already there. He was inside running the morning check on the equipment the way he did every day, regardless of what else was happening in the world. Because machines do not care about family dinners or legal proceedings or the weight of things people carry from one day to the next. They simply require attention, and Ray gave it to them, and that was one of the reasons I had trusted him with the most important work of the last 14 months. He looked up when we came through the door. He looked at Noah first, then at me, and he said, "Morning," and went back to what he was doing, which was exactly the right response and exactly what I had expected from him. I led Noah across the shop floor. The Haas mill was running a warm-up cycle in the far corner, its spindle turning in the particular way it had turned since I rebuilt it in 2014, smooth and even and reliable, in the way that well-maintained things are reliable the way people can be too when they are cared for properly over time. The Mazak lathe stood beside it. Ray's domain, the machine he had run for 22 years, with the same focused attention he gave to everything. The plasma cutter. The welding stations. The inspection bench where Gloria checked the finished work before it went out the door. Everything I had built, standing exactly where I had put it. I went to the tool cabinet in the back corner of the shop. It was an old steel cabinet painted gray with a handle that had been replaced twice and a bottom drawer that required a particular angle to open correctly, a thing I had never bothered to fix because I had learned the angle so long ago that it required no thought. I opened the bottom drawer and reached to the back of it and pulled out a metal box. It was a small toolbox, the kind that closes with 2 latches on the front. Blue paint, mostly worn away now, with scratches along every surface that told the story of the places it had been and the things it had done. I had bought it at a hardware store in the summer of 1972 when I was 19 years old and had just rented the first shop space I ever called mine, a single bay, in a building on the east side of Nashville that smelled of exhaust and old wood and possibility. I had put my first tools in this box and carried it to that bay and set it on the workbench and stood there looking at it and understood for the first time that I was building something, though I could not yet see its shape. I set the box on the workbench in front of Noah. He looked at it, then he looked at me. "Open it," I said. He unlatched the 2 front clasps and lifted the lid. Inside were the original tools, not the full set. Some had been replaced and upgraded over the decades, but the core of them were here, the ones I had started with. A combination wrench set, a set of screwdrivers with wooden handles worn smooth, a pair of needle-nose pliers with the joint slightly loose, which I had never replaced, because the looseness gave them a particular feel I had come to rely on. A small digital caliper that was older than Noah himself. He touched the wrench set with 2 fingers carefully, the way you touch something that belongs to another time. "Grandpa," he said, and his voice was rough at the edges in the way voices get when feeling outpaces language. "These are yours now," I said. "Not because I am giving up, because you are starting." I let him look at them for a moment. "I am not giving you wealth, Noah. I am giving you a trade. An honest shop with honest work and people who show up every morning because the work matters to them." I paused. "And I am giving you the most important thing I know. Never turn the people you love into a transaction. The moment you do, you stop being a person and start being a price tag. And no amount of money is worth what you lose when that happens." Noah stood at the workbench with the blue toolbox open in front of him, and his jaw working and his eyes bright, and he did not try to say anything for a moment, which was the right choice because some things do not need an answer. Then he reached over and put his arms around me and held on. I stood in the middle of the shop I had built over 50 years in the morning light, coming through the high windows with the Haas mill running its warm-up cycle in the corner, and Ray working quietly on the other side of the floor, and my grandson holding on to me like a man holding on to something real, and I put my hand on the back of his head the way I had not done since he was small, and I let him. After a while, he stepped back and wiped his face with his sleeve. "Okay," he said. "Okay," I said. Ray looked over from across the shop. He gave us both a single nod. Then he turned back to the lathe and the morning began. It is November now. The maple trees along County Road 14 have gone past gold and are bare against a gray Tennessee sky, the branches clean and spare the way things get when the season has finished with them and left them to wait for whatever comes next. I drive past the lake house sometimes on my way to the shop. I do not stop. I do not need to. Eleanor is not in that house anymore. She has not been for 10 years. What she left behind was never in the walls or the windows or the dock running out over the water. What she left behind is the thing I am still carrying, the thing that has no address and cannot be sold on Facebook Marketplace for $8 or any other price. I have been thinking about what this story means. Not to me, I know what it means to me. I have been thinking about what it means to the people who might hear it and recognize something in it, a shape they have seen before in their own lives, a feeling they have had sitting at a table with people they love and wondering whether love is actually what is happening or whether something else has taken its name. Here is what I know after 72 years and 40 years of building something with my hands, and one very long September that changed the direction of everything. Family is not a guarantee. It is a choice that has to be made again every day in small ways and large ones, in the moments when it is easy and especially in the moments when it is not. A grandpa story is not just a story about an old man and what he built. It is a story about what gets passed down, not the money, not the property, not the equipment in a shop on Route 9, but the way a person moves through the world when they believe that honesty matters and that the people around them deserve to be treated as people rather than positions on a balance sheet. That is the only family story worth telling. That is the only grandpa story worth hearing. I want to tell you something about Noah. He came to the shop every morning last month, not because I asked him to. He rearranged his class schedule, and he drove 40 minutes each way, and he showed up before 7 and stayed until the afternoon light went flat, and Ray had to tell him twice to go home and eat something. He is learning the mazak. He is slow and careful with it, the way beginners are when they understand that a mistake is a real thing with real consequences, and Ray stands beside him without impatience and corrects him when he needs it and says nothing when he does not, which is exactly how I learned and exactly how I taught and exactly how it should go. I do not know what Jason is doing. I do not know what Diane or Carol or Melissa are doing. That is not a cruel thing to say. It is simply the shape of the decision I made in that room at the lake house, and I have made my peace with it the way you make peace with any hard thing. not by pretending it does not hurt, but by deciding that the hurt belongs to the past and the mourning belongs to something else. I believe in God. I always have in the quiet way that men who work with their hands tend to believe not loudly, not with a great deal of ceremony, but with the steady understanding that the world is larger than what I can see, and that the things that have sustained me through the hardest years of my life did not come entirely from inside myself. I have felt that presence in Eleanor's last mourning, and in the sound of equipment running well, and in a 19-year-old boy singing Happy Birthday in a convenience store back room at midnight, with a candle and a cupcake, and no audience but an old man crying quietly in a hospital bed 300 miles away. God moves in the spaces between people when people let Him. I have tried to let Him. I have not always succeeded, but I have tried. If this grandpa story has stayed with you, if something in it felt familiar, if you recognized the weight of it or the particular kind of love that does not announce itself, but simply shows up in a parking lot before sunrise, with a cracked mirror and 300 miles already behind it, then I want to ask you something. Think of the person in your life who shows up without being asked, who calls on the birthday nobody else remembered, who drives the distance when everyone else finds a reason not to. Tell them. Not tomorrow. Tell them today, because today is the only day any of us can be certain of, and the people who show up quietly deserve to hear at least once that you noticed. This has been a family story about what a father builds and what it means to pass something real down to someone who will carry it forward with honest hands. If you believe in family justice and the quiet power of patience over anger, I hope this story gave you something worth keeping. I release new grandpa stories and family stories every week on this channel. If this one if it made you feel something true, please subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Leave a comment below and tell me about someone in your life who showed up when it mattered. I read everyone. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. All characters, names, events, and locations are products of the imagination, and any resemblance to actual persons or real events is entirely coincidental. To Noah, wherever you are in the world listening to this, keep your hands on the work. Keep your word when you give it, and never not once turn the people you love into a transaction. The morning is still beginning. I have told you this story the way I lived it, one quiet decision at a time. If there is a lesson in it here, it is in my own words. The greatest thing a man can build is not a business. It is the kind of character that makes the right people trust him when everything is falling apart. God does not promise us easy families. He promises to be present in the difficult ones. Do not be like I was for too long, looking the other way, hoping people would become who you needed them to be. See clearly. Act early. Protect what is real. Here is what I believe: blood does not make family. Showing up makes family. These grandpa stories are the ones I carry with me, not because they ended well, but because they taught me something true. Every family story worth telling has a moment where someone had to choose between comfort and honesty. This was mine. And like all honest grandpa stories, this one belongs to anyone who has ever loved someone more than they were loved in return. That is the family story none of us plan to live, but many of us know by heart. If this reached you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment, subscribe, and stay. There are more stories coming. Thank you for walking this road with me to the very end. The following stories contain fictional elements created for storytelling and educational purposes. If this type of content is not for you, we respect that. Please find what speaks to your heart.